Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A huge warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us once again for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission, as always, is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature spanning a whole range of genres to book lovers all around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I am Darren Kazako, science fiction and horror author, avid reader, and one of your co-hosts and founder of Australian Book Lovers, and I'm coming to you today from Corner Country.
And I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, reader, and your other co-founder and host for this evening or today or morning, afternoon, good evening, good night, one of those. But I am coming to you today from Wurundjeri country in the lands of the Woiwurrung people in Victoria.
Well, isn't that the irony? Because we are probably, for most people, coming to their reality through digital.
Yes.
There is no day, night or daytime, anything. It's we
it's
exist
just
when
whenever
you want us to exist.
And we could use the classic Australian term g'day, which is kind of all times of day or night, or we could just say hello, or we could just say welcome, but we get a bit carried away, I suppose, with where we are, placing ourselves in our own reality.
Yes, that's right. But it's a nice reality because eventually, maybe we will, as a species, be upbeamed to digital realms, and we'll relish those days when we can say, we come from this street, down the road from this beach, and at the time of recording, the weather was this. But nonetheless, episode 36, and it is an industry special once again. You beauty.
Yes, look, I love these. The people are so passionate. We learn so much.
Oh, 100%. And I think I learnt a lot this one, definitely, even though I am technically from South Australia, although born in Victoria, but grew up in South Australia. And, of course, this is none other than Jessica Alice from the South Australian Writers Centre.
Yes.
So, yes, wow. And I'm jealous that you got the opportunity to interview her.
Indeed, I did. And there were some very special bits at the end that I thought, Darren's going to be very sad that he had to pull out at the last minute, but that is okay. Jessica was very gracious and very generous with her time, as are all the people who were involved in the Writers' Centre. So it was a lovely chat.
Yes, and I think this might just be for 2021, which has been one hell of a year for everybody across the globe. I think this will be officially our last Writers' Centre interview for 2021.
Yes.
And wow.
Yes.
But, I mean, to think we were even going to be able to interview all these fantastic, centres at the start of the year. I think for me, I don't think it was there, but, so wow. Like, I know that, everyone's got an opinion for what 2021 is, and I'm sure a lot of us maybe have reasons to want to forget it, I guess. But through all the chaos and through all the carnage and through everything else, like, what a cherry on top, though, that it is a very special opportunity as far as, yourself and I doing this podcast and being able to interview so many wonderful people from these, writer centres all around Australia that are just so passionate and working so hard to carry the art forward for the Australian community.
Yes, most definitely. And look, Jessica was brilliant. She's the director of Writers SA. Now, she's a poet, a critic, a broadcaster, and she was the artistic director for Melbourne's West, living on Corner Country in Adelaide, of course, now. But she was the chair, or she is also the chair of the Arts Industry Council of South Australia. So she's really critically involved in the community, the artistic community over there. She's a member of the Cat Musket Fellowship, which is a prize for writers and editors. And this is where I was getting to with my Melbourne thing. She was formerly the program manager of the Melbourne Writers Festival and co-director of the National Young Writers Festival.
Oh, wow.
she's been served on boards including Sin Media and the Melbourne International Arts Festival, of course. So she herself, her writing and her criticism is published in The Guardian, Metro Magazine, Overland, Vice, The Lifted Brow, Cordite Poetry Review, Australian Poetry Journal, and the anthology Solid Air, Australian and New Zealand Spoken Word. So we do actually mention poetry just a little in the interview, as you can imagine.
Well, I'd hope so too, yeah, but but isn't it fantastic, like the calibre of each representative of each state's writing centre? It's just huge.
Oh,
it is just phenomenal.
Amazing.
I mean, you have to almost think we're world class. In fact, I'd like to think we're world class when it comes to Australia's writer centres. And, Jessica Alice is testament to that, and as is all of our wonderful guests.
Yes. And the team that she's got, the board that they've got, all, incredibly creative people and, putting so much into really supporting the creative talents, and their logline is helping writers realise their creative and professional dreams. And look, they absolutely do. If you have a look at their spring program, which is out now, it is just fantastic. So they have, as all the others do, a year-round program, but they've got modern magical realism, which is something that I might be a little bit happy to look at. The other thing, though, is that they've got a number of sort of interactions. They've got the First Nations Writers Group. They've got See Me Through My Hands. So this is, we had a little bit of a chat about that, so I won't say any more, but it's about deaf storytellers' lives. So have a listen to in the interview about that. It was really good. And lots of other, the Liminal Writers, Literary Market Lab, No Limits, which is sort of, young regional writers, and they're doing really well with their regional stuff. Again, something, fairly specific there. So without further ado, I think we could sort of jump into my chat.
Maybe.
No, you've got something else.
Or, well, because South Australia has a reputation for being a little bit beat up by these states.
Really?
Now, yeah, I think so. Now,
okay.
And I am, originally, there is no other original. I'm born in Geelong, so I'm Victorian as well. However, grew up South Australia. Nonetheless, you did mention that the South Australian Writers Centre was the first one in Australia.
This is true.
So I thought I'd just very quickly, before we go, being a South Australian, and I want to be proud and, represent all the South Australian readers out there and writers.
Yep.
And so, did you know that in 1894 in South Australia, Parliament passed the Constitutional Amendment Act, and that resulted in South Australia becoming the very first colony in Australia and the fourth place in the world to grant adult women the right to vote, and the very first in the world to grant them the right to stand as members of Parliament, and that right to vote included First Nations women. So that is very special.
That is brilliant.
Yeah,
that is
I think
absolutely brilliant, yes.
Now, when it comes to the Australian Police Force, no comment. It was actually formed in 1838, which was only 2 years after the colony's founding. And now this is actually considered the third oldest centrally organised police force. And that is behind only the London Metropolitan, which was founded in 1829, and the Dublin Police Force, which was funded in 1836. Now, when it comes to inventions, ladies and gentlemen, come on. The military tank was designed by none other than Lancelot de Molay in 1910. Although, and this is a famous South Australian, but his plans or his blueprints, or I guess his patent, was overlooked but was recognised post-World War One for the fact that he had come up with it first, I guess, is the easy way to say it. We have Mr. David, and now I hope I pronounced this one, Unaipon, who in 1910, of course, invented the shearing machine. And this gentleman is featured on, or was at one point featured on our $50 note. And he was also at the time trying to invent a perpetual motion machine. So a very smart individual, and also a very smart first Australian who has shaped our whole landscape as far as our culture and our social recognition, I suppose, because who doesn't know about, the shearing shed or the shearing machine?
Yes, yes.
Fast forward to 1945, here we go. It's by a gentleman by the name of Lance Hill. Can you guess this one?
No.
The Hills Hoist.
Oh, of course.
Now,
Of course.
who hasn't swung off the edge of the washing machine, the clothesline, as it swings around? That is the Hills Hoist.
Yeah. And if you see our clothesline, you would know that, yes, the children have done that throughout their lives because they are warped, and it does have this kind of wobble as you push it around.
Of course, because it's never centred properly.
No.
But for all those injuries that we grew up with as children, you can thank Mr. Lance Hill for the Hills Hoist.
There you go.
Now, of course, I can't remember the exact date, but there was the first ever Holden WB panel van owned by myself, author Darren Kesenko. That's another story. But finally, when it comes to fantastic Australian authors, of course, we have Mr. Colin Thiel, who gave us the very famous Storm Boy and Bluefin.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think...
About the beautiful Coorong, yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So I think South Australia, a lot of people overlook it for some reason, but there's some wonderful things come out of it. So if you remember as a child whizzing through the air while your mum or dad was hanging up the washing and possibly it wobbled and you swung off and you got an injury, they're good memories. And that's from Mr. Hills Hoist himself, Lance Hill.
There you go. Now, you did, of course, forget one person who I do remember as being from South Australia. So Australia's second astronaut was, in fact, born in Adelaide. So Andy Thomas.
Yes.
Paul Scully Power was the first, and he was from Sydney. But Andy Thomas was, in fact, born in Adelaide.
Yeah, so they trialled the first astronaut, realised that didn't work, and went with the real thing. Yeah, of course. No, I'm only joking.
Got a serious one. Sorry, Paul. He was, but anyway, because of course at the moment I'm still doing all things science fiction. So not only am I reading the fabulous self-published science fiction, I think we're up to the top 30. So our group is reading our top 10 out of our 30. But I'm also just started a course with Pamela Freeman at the Australian Writer Centre doing fantasy, science fiction and more. And I'm focusing on science fiction standalone, believe it, the standalone novel that I had an idea for.
Just a one story.
Just a one story. How outrageous is that for a speculative fiction author? Yes, and looking at all things science fiction. Hence, what I said to you is that I wouldn't be showing anybody all the tabs that I've got open about spider anatomy and organic spaceships and all those kind of things. So we're just going to leave that for another day. But yes, so good fun. South Australia, we love you.
Yes, well, all of Australia, we love you.
Yeah, we do.
Yay.
We do.
Well, we're coming into the summer. It's the summer of love. Let's make this the summer of love, the summer of love of Australian artists.
And ably supported by Writers SA.
Yes, absolutely. And so, thank you so much, Veronica, for the interview.
It was a pleasure.
Let's go.
And welcome, book lovers. We have with us today Jessica Ellis, who is the director of Writers SA. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Veronica. It's lovely to be joining you.
Excellent. We've had an exciting morning over here in Victoria with our earthquake, but we are settled, and I'm coming to you today from Wurundjeri country. I'm on Woiwurrunga, the traditional owners, where I am seated at the moment. Can you tell us where you're placed?
Yes, I'm joining you from beautiful Ghana Yatta, land of the Ghana people in Adelaide.
Fantastic. And it sounds like you're having some great weather over there as well, from all accounts.
Oh, well, I mean, it's spring, so sort of lulls you into a false sense of security.
It does.
Beautiful sunshine, and then it changes.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit like Melbourne. So, yeah, there we go. Tell me, if you would, how long have you been at Writers SA?
I've been the director of Writers SA for the past 3 years. A little over 3 years now. And I came here from Melbourne Writers Festival, where I was previously the program manager. So I've been working in Australian literary organisations for quite some time now.
Sounds like an excellent background for the oldest or the first Writers Centre in Australia.
First Writers Centre, yes. Yeah. Writers SA, formerly known as the SA Writers Centre, was established in 1985, and it kind of set the model for what we now know to be like the Writers Centre model, where they exist in every state and territory in Australia. Right, so it's good to be the first.
Yeah,
but still also I think we're definitely do things a little bit differently at Writers SA and have a pretty sort of innovative approach to things.
So tell us a little bit about that, because looking at your website, it is chock-a-block full of so many fantastic things for writers of all ages and experience and all of those kind of things. So what makes Writers SA so innovative?
Yeah, so we do quite a few things. So our essential tenet is that we are working towards a culture of literature in Australia, so nationally, and doing that through supporting particularly South Australian writers and empowering them to be leading the national literary discourse. So we do that in a number of different ways. So we work with our amazing team of professional writers to run professional skills development courses. So that's things like workshops and those sorts of events where you can learn from that great wealth of expertise from professional practicing writers. We provide services, so we work with people to develop the manuscripts, and we connect them with agents and publishers. And then we also do sector capacity building initiatives where we work in very grassroots ways. So, for example, working with First Nations writers, deaf writers, writers with disability, and working with them to create opportunities to connect them with the broader national industry. So that might be through working to create a performance that is then presented on a writers' festival stage that is then translated into a conversation with a publisher and develops into an anthology, like those kinds of relationships and pathways. And we also are loud champions of literature and the arts. So we do a lot of public advocacy work to be talking about the need for the recognition for literature, for funding, and for literature to be really central in the way that we understand creative and civic life, wherever we are, not just in Adelaide, but also in Australia. And we love to work in partnerships, in collaboration. So we're always working with other art forms, a lot of really interesting interdisciplinary stuff with music, with film, with theatre, with games, and then also partnering up with festivals, with publishers, anyone really, just to create as many good opportunities that we can that fulfill the needs of writers.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Just that integrative way of working. It's integrative, holistic. The having writing as partners, and I like that. Loud champions. Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you are definitely there. Thinking about I notice very much the See Me Through My Hands. You did a couple of years of the Deaf Storytellers Live, and See Me Through My Hands. And I've just finished reading The Shape of Sound by Fiona Murphy, who is a writer who is deaf and talks about her journey. And I think Auslan in particular as a language has been so much to the fore with all of the press conferences over the last couple of years that people have been exposed to that. So that's fantastic what started you doing, storytelling with people who are deaf?
So See Me Through My Hands was a performance project that came out of consultation that we did with the deaf community in collaboration with the local disability arts organisation in South Australia called Access to Arts. And the community, like the deaf community, identified that one of the things they wanted more of was opportunities to develop storytelling skills, to be writers. So we created this program that was kind of like a mentoring program that had a performance outcome in it. So it started with connecting professional writers, so some of South Australia's greatest writers like Hannah Kent and Jared Thomas to mentor deaf writers in like the nuts and bolts of storytelling, just to share their skills. But then it kind of developed into this really interesting artistic and kind of like a translation project where we were then working with those deaf writers to then perform some stories, original works that they had written on stage at Adelaide Writers Week in Auslan. And the idea was that we were centering deaf stories and deaf experience as the default way of viewing this event. So it was in Auslan, and we had interpreters who were providing spoken interpretation for people who are hearing. And it was fantastic because, as you say, I think for hearing people, it's often not something that you get to experience. And you're right that in many ways these daily press conferences that have been Auslan interpreted have, I think reminded a lot of hearing people, about experiences outside of their own. So it was wonderful to be able to present this event in a mainstream festival where deaf language and deaf storytelling was the center, like that was the default for it. And it was a great project, and has one of those projects where it was a fairly contained thing. We ran it over 2 years. There were about 8 deaf writers in it, but what has spawned from that is so many collaborations and relationships between the different writers, and people are developing their stories and working with publishers. And it's just a great example of how like a small sort of project can have some really big impacts, and one that was transformative not only for the participants, but I think just everyone who was involved with it and the audience.
Fantastic. It sounds as though Writers SA are very happy to plant seeds and to, nurture a whole lot of, different flowers, have 1,000 flowers blooming. I noticed that you've got quite a lot happening for younger writers, some of it online, but tell us a little bit about how you encourage early writers.
Yeah, we run a few programs for young writers. Primarily is our Teen Writers Club, which is so popular, and it runs every term, and it's a cohort of teen writers who meet together every weekend, and they work with a mentor. At the moment, it's an amazing comics writer, Dan Thorsland, who used to write for I always forget which one it is. It's, like Marvel or DC.
Oh, right.
The big comics ones. And so we often have really fantastic facilitators like that who work with the young writers. And it's a beautiful program because so often there are young people who want to be, they're just inherently creative and then wanting to tell their stories. They may not necessarily have all the resources from their school to be able to do that. So it's great to be able to offer this as a kind of like supplementary thing. And particularly in a place like Adelaide, we've just launched our regional program. We've just expanded into hiring the regional coordinators in 3 regional locations around South Australia, and they are working specifically with young people. And part of that is because if you want to be a writer, so often that means by necessity having to move to a bigger city. So whether you're regional, it might mean moving to Adelaide, but in many cases, if you live in Adelaide, it might mean moving to Melbourne or Sydney, to be closer to publishers. So these programs are really trying to provide a bit of a link there so that there is great professional support and resources for young people so that they can learn about this stuff where they are. They may not necessarily need to leave their home if they don't want to, but it's sort of like filling that gap and making sure that every young person knows that they can be a writer, because sometimes they may not even know it's a thing that is possible for them. So that I think is what's so important about it is making young people know that it's something that they can do, and then giving them access to these amazing writers so that they can, see this trajectory for themselves. And they're such popular programs. I think we know how much young people love to write.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Because obviously you've got zine workshops and you've got journalism and you've got songwriting and all sorts of things. So teen writer, spring person, yeah, it's fantastic. And lots of groups. I was amazed. I think just on your website alone, there are 19 writers groups that you've got there. And do you support them, or I noticed some of them are regional? How does that work?
Some of them. So we have like affiliate members of Writers SA. So obviously we're a membership organization, and mostly that is individuals. So we support our writers in many different ways, but often there are writers groups. So they are largely autonomous. So they are self-sustaining groups who are very organized, and many of them have been around for a very long time. And we work with them more in sort of a collegial way, where we might sort of be at meetings sometimes, or support them if there's something that they're looking for, or help auspice a grant or something like that. But we like to promote all of those groups that exist, because so many of them are they're geographically based, so it might be local government areas or regional locations. So we just really want to be able to connect people with each other, because so many of the questions that we get from members, and particularly new members to the organisation, are people who are wanting to build up a kind of community but may not necessarily know where to look. So a lot of it is about letting people know that these groups exist.
Fantastic. And I love the name of the Mutant Stepchildren. They sound like my kind of people. Science fiction and fantasy and other manifestations.
They're great. It's huge. It's whenever we have like a meetup or something, like often we'll just do like a social event that Writers SA will put on. And when we do sci-fi and fantasy, there is a very strong contingent.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. What's your favourite kind of reading? Are you allowed to say, or you've got to remain balanced and say you love everything?
Oh, well, I always unashamedly push a poetry agenda.
I wondered, yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Writers SA does cater to as many types of writing as we can. My primary personal creative practice is in poetry. So that's something that I have a fondness for, writing as well as reading. But I read everything as well. Like I also judge a number of literary prizes, which is great in a way, because it means that I do read more broadly than what I might ordinarily. So reading across genres. Yeah, it's a good thing to be, because I think everyone should read broadly. It's one of the most important ways to be a writer, I think, is to read. It's good not to be stuck into any one thing. But yes, I would recommend people expanding their reading horizons to include poetry if it doesn't already, because it is particularly the last couple of years, so much great poetry is coming out, not only from dedicated poetry publishers like Vagabond and Giramondo, but also from some of the university presses, like UQP is putting out a huge amount of poetry at the moment, and some of the bigger publishers too.
Do you think it's been helped by the rise in performance poetry?
Yeah, very possibly. I mean, I think that there's been a few very high profile, I'm just thinking about that young woman who
was at the inauguration in the US.
Yes, who was at the inauguration. She was also at the Met Gala.
Right.
So, she's really cut through. I've just forgotten her name, but also performance poets like Wasson Shire, who Beyonce used one of her poems on her album Lemonade. And poets like Hira Lindsay Bird in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, has had like a great amount of success sort of in the mainstream as well. So yeah, maybe that is one of those things that's sort of letting people know that you don't need to be a poet to understand poetry, that it is something that is more accessible than that.
Yes, absolutely. And I heard is he Welsh poet, David White? One of my friend's favourite poets, he came... Patrick White, no, that's the author. David White, I think it is. But to hear him speak perform, I guess, his poetry. And I'd read some of his works before I went, and I thought, it's nothing like hearing it from the poet themselves and just hearing where the emphasis lies and where the passion and the quiet and all of that. It was just brilliant.
Yeah. I was very fortunate to go to the Jaipur Literature Festival in 2020, about a month or less than that before COVID shut the whole world down. And it was wonderful to be at the Jaipur Festival because there was such a greater, in India, there's such a greater understanding, I think, of poetry more broadly. And so to be at a festival that's absolutely enormous, with just thousands and thousands of people, and people being so excited about poets on stage, and to see crowds of people coming to hear poetry was beautiful. So
good for your soul.
Hoping for more of that. Yeah, good for the soul indeed.
Yeah. It's lovely. So, and you have some writing out and about, or some poetry out and about. So tell us a little bit about that. I was formally a spoken word poet for most of my time that I've been practicing as a writer. So mostly working in the spoken form, but in more recent years have been writing for the page and have been publishing poetry around the place. So with places like Cordite and Australian Poetry Journal and all those sorts of great literary journals. And it's something that I'm always trying to, this is just one of those classic day job versus creative practice things. Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a challenge trying to prioritize creative practice while also having a pretty demanding full-time job.
Yes.
But yes, hoping to be writing more.
We leave it at that. Tell me, Jessica, in the time that you've spent, I guess, within, let's just say, the writing and publishing industry broadly, what are the changes that you have noticed, or what has been most significant for you since perhaps you began as a much younger and less experienced person in the industry?
In many ways, not much has changed, because I think the sort of structural changes in any industry do tend to happen quite slowly. But I do think there has been a very noticeable shift, particularly since sort of like Black Lives Matter came to Australia as well, which caused some really like necessary discussions about colonization and racism, but also kind of like lit that fire a bit under literature and publishing as well, which has been, like many art forms, incredibly culturally homogenous for such a long time. And it does feel as if there is a sense that is something that is trying to be addressed, but also there is, it's still very slow and change still isn't happening fast enough, and that's due to a lot of structural and institutional reasons. But I hope that is one thing that continues to change, because it's reflected in not only the books. Like, I think at the moment we're getting so many books that are coming out from First Nations and POC writers, but it's like publishing houses are still incredibly white. There are very few First Nations editors in particular. So those are the kinds of things that really do need to shift. One of the things that I don't have data on this, but I just feel it sort of anecdotally, but a thing that has been interesting to see is, maybe that increase in poetry, but also short stories, I think, have been finding a bit more of a market lately. I would be interested to know if the publishing data does actually reflect that. But that seems to be something that I think is great, because Australia has always been a little bit slow on the short story tradition. It's not as strong as in places like the United States. So it's wonderful to have seen that change over the last couple of years too.
And the shift towards self-publishing and hybrid publishing, is that reflected in South Australia as well?
Yeah, it's pretty popular among our members. I think it kind of depends on what people are seeking to do, and what form and genre they're writing in. Obviously, it suits some genres really well, where there's sort of a huge particularly like online market, like in ebooks and stuff. It's something that I also can be a difficult one to navigate, because one of the things that we find at Writers SA is protecting new writers from what may be vanity publishing through not quite knowing exactly the differences between like traditional publishing, self-publishing, and then sort of like publishing services.
Yes.
Yeah. So while it is like definitely a an avenue that many writers are sort of seeking for different reasons, and professional writers are perhaps slightly more pursuing self-publishing because it might give them better access to readers, maybe more creative control, all those sorts of things. But definitely something that we've found at Writers SA is something that we do like to educate our members about too, because it can get a little bit murky.
Yes. Like many stories, I can easily tell you half a dozen of poor experience, myself included. So it's important, I think, particularly, which is why we really wanted to give a voice to some of the writers' centres, that people know there are information and resources out there that people can talk to somebody about. Have you heard about such and such, or which way do I go? Particularly as, if people are using writing as, I guess, their second career. So people like myself who started a little bit later, and you think, well, I should know what I'm doing. I'll just do a little bit of Googling, but that doesn't get you anywhere near the depth and breadth of the community that is around to support writers.
Yeah, that's right. And so we would strongly encourage anyone to get in touch with their local writers' centre, in your readers' states, because we will happily take that call and walk people through, what to look out for, what is a legitimate publishing deal, and the kind of things that you just need to know. That's one of the best things that writers' centres offer, is just being able to offer that insight and that knowledge about the industry that can often be quite opaque. Because if you haven't really been in it for a while, it's hard to know how a lot of stuff in publishing works, and that's where your writers' centre comes in, is that we can help you out with all of that.
Very good. And I can see, looking at the resources, you've got, a manuscript assessment, mentorship programs, first feedback, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, that's right. So there's, they're really all just the things that they're the kinds of services that are hard to come by. Like manuscript assessments are an interesting thing, because often you need someone to read your manuscript before you're starting to send it out to agents and publishers and everything. There are a lot of different places that offer things like manuscript assessment services, but I would say from what Writers SA offers is that you will have an objective, critical assessment. I think one of the issues when people are seeking, a second pair of eyes to look over their manuscript, is that it's hard to get that objective feedback, and it's hard to get honest, critical appraisal. So this is what that service does, because the idea is to either, let people know where they should be sending this manuscript to post haste, if it's, absolutely ready to go. But also to prevent people from maybe sending out work that is not its strongest. Right. So that's a real crucial service there. But yeah, all of those things about the craft of writing and the ins and outs of the publishing industry, that's where we love to step in and provide real hands-on support.
Fantastic. You have a great team of on your, you've got a great team by the looks of all of that fantastic experience and enthusiasm in people's CVs on the website that I noticed. Marketing, regional managers, program coordinators, and for people that don't know SA all that well, you have metro and regional and very remote parts of SA. So how do you and the team put it all together so that all your resources are available for across the state?
Yeah. So we are the only writers' centre in the country that has regionally based staff members,
Very
and
good.
we're very proud of that.
Yeah.
It's a relatively new addition to Writers SA, but it's great because it means that we can truly say now that we are statewide.
Yes.
Because we aim to advocate and serve all writers, but I think we can honestly say now that is statewide. So that's great. Our team has grown significantly in the last couple of years, and a lot of it is about checking in with the sector, like with the state and with writers and readers in the state to find out what people need so that we're not creating programs that already exist or that people aren't interested in, and that we're not missing anything that's really important. So we do have a great amount of communication with our members. And sometimes that's through formal means like audience surveys and things like that. And often it's just about literally talking to people and being a part of your community is how that happens. And we also work in a kind of iterative way where, unlike a festival or something like that, where you sort of release one program all at once, we work in a year-round artistic program. So we tend to program quarterly. So every couple of months we refresh what we're offering. And that means that we can remain really responsive to what people are needing, and also make sure that we're having the opportunity to find some great writers who can work with us, but then also figure out what people need at the most critical time.
Yeah, which is good. Yeah, it is important to keep fresh because things change. Talking to an author the other day who writes literary RPG, and luckily I've got one son who's a mad gamer, so I knew a little bit about it, but it was just fascinating.
Oh yeah, because there are a whole of. It just reminded me one of our former staff members from Writers SA, formerly a program manager, left the organisation a couple of years ago because he had gotten his dream job, which was writing for a games company in Berlin.
There you go.
Yeah, which is just a dream, but. So great that there are, this is a bigger and a growing field, because particularly as these sorts of tech industries grow and as games become bigger and bigger, like they are in need of storytellers. Like they've got developers, and they've got all the tech side of things, but they need writers because they need the people who are going to create the story around which the game is built.
Yes.
So it's for people who are interested in that area of writing, it's something to really explore. And we've been doing quite a bit of it. So I would encourage anyone who's keen on that side of things to get in touch, because particularly in South Australia, we have a booming games industry. So it's, a real interesting area.
There you go. Well, my co-host, who normally would have been with me today, is a bit of a mad gamer as well and likes the virtual reality games too. So he will be sorry that he's missed this chance to pump you for information on that one. But anyway, I'll tell him to get on the website, which he had done his homework. So I'm sure he's seen those sort of things there.
Great.
So what's coming up, Jessica? What does the next couple of months hold for Writers SA, or for writers and readers in South Australia?
We have so much coming up. So immediately, like in the near future, in about 2 weeks' time, we have our Writers Festival Context that we present in partnership with the City of Adelaide. It's an incredible program. It's a 3-day festival held at the City Library here in Adelaide, and it's been curated by a young First Nations writer, Dominic Guerrera, who's a Ghana Narrandjeri guy, and he's just an incredible poet, but an incredible artistic programmer. And so he's put together an amazing program of majoritively First Nations writers who will spend 3 days exploring all aspects of storytelling. So we've got sessions on telling stories within colonial collecting institutions like museums, and how do we change the narrative of these archives, and how do we tell First Nations stories into the future from these institutions. We've got journalists coming together to talk about the state of the media industry. We've got zines, a zine workshop, which will be lovely. We've got songwriting workshops. So that'll just be fantastic. So that runs from the 8th to the 10th of October. And we've also just released our spring program. So we've got events from now right up until the end of the year. And there's some really incredible events in there. We've got Thomas Keneally, that's an online event. So you can Zoom in from anywhere. We'll be sharing insights from his incredible career. Ali Cobby Eckerman, the amazing First Nations poet, will be doing a beautiful poetry workshop. And there's just so much great stuff in the program. There's also cultural criticism. We've got horror writing for Halloween. Yeah, so many things. So have a look on the website. There's, as you say, there's so much coming up.
There's so much. And horror of Darren will definitely be on the website because he is a horror writer, so that will make him very happy. I know that our time is short, so where is it best, apart from the website, which is writersa.org.au, where else can people find yourselves? What social media do you have out and about?
We're on most of them. Writers Essays on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we have a couple of Facebook groups as well. So if you are South Australian based, you can join those, particularly if you're a member. And you can drop us a line at info@writersa.org.au if you have any queries.
That's fantastic.
We're always happy to pick up the phone and help out any way we can.
Lovely. And I've got to admit to being a little bit jealous that you're running in-person events, being over here in 6-time lockdown Victoria, and I'm sure our listeners in New South Wales are feeling a little bit the same. So it is good to see that there is still, life in the arts and festivals. But can I ask you, are you missing Melbourne's coffee?
Well, one of the great things about Adelaide is its incredible food and wine.
There you go. So not
kind of
really.
spoiled for choice
in
Adelaide. But yes, of course, I haven't visited because I'm from Melbourne, and I haven't visited in a little while because of the lockdowns.
Yes.
So I do hope to be home to see my family and friends at some point. But in the meantime, we're all getting together on screens.
Yes,
so that's fine.
yes.
Yeah.
We're Zooming tonight for dinner. My children are all in lockdown Melbourne as well. So, it's a little tricky. Not the same as in person. The energy's not quite right, but it's better than nothing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's great for what we have to do right now. And it's great that we have this option.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Jessica Ellis, Director of Writers SA, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your sharing all of the fantastic resources and events and information that's available to not only writers in South Australia, of course, because if people are members of the other writers' states and territories, they can access some of the programs that you have as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Veronica. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent.
Let's meet again, where magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.